We get going on this Valentine's Day webinar. Welcome if you've just joined us in the meantime. We're going to be talking about Valentine's Day in the English classroom. Okay. Just as always, you will receive a certificate of participation and a webinar handout in the next few days. Um, Send us an email at formazione@MLA World if you don't receive it. Should come out tomorrow afternoon, okay, or by tomorrow afternoon. In that, you'll receive all the important information from this handout. I think there's quite a few worksheets for this one as well.
Hmm.
Some links that can really help you as well. So make sure you get that. Email me if you don't get that, and I'll send it out to you. Okay. As I'm sure everyone knows, next Wednesday is February the 14th, Valentine's Day. And so we thought that we'd give you some activities and ideas that you can use in your classes on Valentine's Day itself or before, or to be honest, anytime. There's no time where love is not appropriate, love and romance not appropriate. Well, I can think of sometimes when it's not appropriate. In class, it's always a good theme. Okay. Um, as any visitor to an MLA summer camp, and I know there's some group leaders here and maybe even some future group leaders here, romance is top of teenagers' minds, and giving some students some language on the subject of love to express themselves in English will doubtless mean that we grab their attention. Okay. It's often thought of that, at least in English-speaking countries, that French and Italian are the languages of love, and that's certainly true. But we need to remember that it was in English that we have the original Romeo and Juliet, the music of Marvin Gaye or Prince, and the novels of Jane Austen, and the film Casablanca. Some key works of romance or love themes. Okay. Let me know in the chat if you've brought up these sort of themes. Have you done activities to do with any of these things? I'm sure there's a lot of people that have had to teach Romeo and Juliet or other love themes or Jane Austen, but have you done any classes particularly about these sort of themes? Okay. Let us know in the chat. You can interact with us in the chat, and we'll be reading that. Okay. We have some objectives, as we always do, and today we want you to be better able to incorporate themes of love and romance into English lessons. Okay, should be able to plan activities that use love and romance as a motivational tool for students to learn English. Prepare some activities which capture your students' imaginations, and we're going to be looking at the end. It's always often requested that we include some literature, so we're going to be looking at some poems that you could teach, or maybe you just want to know a bit more about in English. Okay. At this stage, I think I'm going to hand over to my colleague Rebecca, and she's going to talk you through a few activities that you can use in your lessons.
Thanks, Josh. Now in previous webinars, sorry, we've spoken about CLIL. It's one of my favorite topics. CLIL, as most of you, I'm sure, know, stands for Content and Language Integrated Learning. So it's where another subject is taught in the target language, in this instance, English. And it's a fantastic tool to broaden your students' vocabulary. So why not give your students a Valentine's Day CLIL lesson? Here we're going to have a look at how history can be taught in English. We have a short video and there's an accompanying comprehension handout that you'll get in an accompanying worksheet which you'll get in the handout. Coffee hasn't worked today, Josh. Um, Tell us, guys, have you used CLIL before? I'm sure you have because in previous webinars we've spoken about it. But if you have, let us know which subjects you've taught in English.
Um,
So, does anybody know why do we celebrate love on February the 14th? Do you know, Josh?
I assume because it's Valentine's
But why?
Day.
And how long have we celebrated love on Valentine's Day? How did the name come about?
Yeah, I'm going to hand over to Rebecca to share her screen here because the video we're going to watch. Okay. Um, this is a video that we will share the link in the handout, so you can use this video yourself. Okay. And let me just stop sharing here.
Okay. Everybody pay attention because there will be some questions
Yeah,
after
there are some questions that we're going to ask you, and then we've got a more comprehensive handout to print
for
off.
your student.
2,000 years ago, the most powerful army in the world belonged to the Romans. The Romans were so strong that they conquered almost all of Europe and parts of Asia and Africa. But then they began to grow very rich and a little bit lazy. Life in the army was harsh, and many of the soldiers longed for the comforts of home. They wanted to get married and set up families. The emperor, whose name was Claudius II, grew worried that his army was growing soft, and so he made a law that no soldier was allowed to get married. By that time, many of the Romans were Christians, and one of their leaders was a bishop called Valentine. He believed that if a man and woman fell in love with each other, they should get married. And so he decided to let soldiers get married in his church, even though now it was against the law. The soldiers' weddings were meant to be kept secret. But as you know, all secrets are hard to keep, and soon the word got out. Valentine was arrested and brought before the emperor, who demanded that he stop helping soldiers to marry, and instead that he pray to the gods of Rome. When he refused, the emperor sentenced him to death. While Valentine was in prison, the jailer's daughter used to bring him his food. She was a young woman who was unfortunately blind. She and Valentine used to spend long hours talking to each other, and soon they fell in love. One day, Valentine put his hand through the bars of the cell and touched the lids of her closed eyes. When she opened them again, she could see. It was a miracle. Valentine's execution was set for the 14th of February. On his last night on earth, he wrote his final message to the girl. He signed his love letter, "From your Valentine." This took place in the year 270, and ever since, lovers have sent each other messages on February the 14th with the same signature. And that's the story.
Okay, so let's see how many of you paid attention.
Nice. Okay, so let's have a look. We have the first question.
Is which adjectives were used to describe the Roman army after their successes?
Let us know in the chat. You can type in the chat. Okay, we'll go through the other questions before seeing your answers.
Yeah, well done, Anna. Brilliant. Okay, we've got them in the chat. Fantastic. Which secret was too hard to keep? And question number 3, what miracle happened?
Was the
And
miracle that they were writing a postcard with the Queen on hundreds of years before there was a
bless
Queen?
the Queen. Maybe
Maybe she's that old.
she was. Um, And when was the first ever Valentine sent? Gosh, people paid attention, Josh. They've done really well.
Yeah, very good. I hope your students pay the same amount of attention as you did. Okay. Sorry, did you want to answer those, Vicky?
All right, so we've got the adjectives were soft and lazy. The secret was marriage. The miracle was that the jailer's daughter could see. She wasn't blind anymore. And the first ever Valentine was sent on the 14th of February 270. Very well done with that, Jordan.
Very good. Okay. We've got this on a worksheet there, so there's a nice worksheet you can just like print out and distribute to your students.
Mm-hmm.
And we've got also the all the answers there in handout as well.
Yeah, there's a handout of the teachers too. And there are also some points to discuss at the bottom if you have higher level students too.
It has the link also of the video on too, so you can prepare that as well for them to see, or even maybe you could even give it as homework and send them the link. They could watch it themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Might be better to do it in class, or else they just copy it.
Yeah. So, some teenagers are a bit lazy too. Now, something a bit more modern, speed dating. So, speed dating is a formalized matchmaking process which has the purpose of encouraging eligible singles to meet large numbers of potential partners in a very short period of time. Speed dating, as a single word, is a registered trademark of Aish Hatora, if anybody wanted to know. And as two separate words, it's often used as a generic term for similar events. Josh, have you been speed dating?
I haven't, no, but I've seen it, the sort of the version of it in classrooms, and it looks really fun.
Mm-hmm.
So when we're talking about it in classrooms, we're not necessarily trying to do
The
matchmaking.
match? No, absolutely not.
It,
Well,
it could do that as well for sure. Okay. Who knows?
but we use it more as a get to know you activity, or even just a revision activity, anything. It just gets your students speaking together and using their imaginations.
And it gives them a sort of like I don't know if you'd say pressure, but it gives them a limited time to speak, so they have to go find out information quickly and then move on to
Mm-hmm.
the person, which is sometimes better than just sticking them in pairs for 10
For a
minutes.
long time. Yeah,
In which case,
it keeps them
perhaps 2
focused.
minutes might be worthwhile, and then 8 minutes of just either speaking in Italian or not speaking at all.
Yeah.
So, Becky's going to tell us a little bit about how to run it.
Yeah. So speed dating in the classroom. You could, I mean, as we said, you can get students to revise things, get to know one another, or you could indeed get your students to create a new personality and get them to be as creative as they like. Get them to think about what they like, what they do, their interests, any peculiar habits, ambitions that they have. So it's really honing in on getting your students to use their imagination, become whoever they would like to be if they had a choice. Firstly, you can elicit what speed dating is. Some of them might know. Um, and also to think about what kind of questions may be asked at such an event.
Hmm.
In pairs or even threes, depending on the size of your class, they can make a list of 10 possible questions to be asked and then take this list with them when they participate in the activity so that they can make notes about who they meet. Then the fun part, divide the class into girls and boys. The girls usually remain seated. We make the boys do all the legwork. Give them about 2 minutes per couple and then get the boys to move to the left and so on. So they get to meet a new person every 2 minutes.
This is like you put them in a circle. Is that what you mean?
Either a circle or a straight line down the middle of your class. Depends on the area that you have. So after each boy has moved around and spoken to every girl, they can then tell the class who they would like to spend more time with as a friend. This version is obviously very light-hearted, but In general, using speed dating or an activity such as this focuses on speaking. And as we've said before, at MLA, we use task-based learning to form communicative classes. So this is an activity that your students may well see in summer if they join us. Um,
The kids like it. I know they really like the idea that you can ask the same question over and over again, get different answers, and be asked different questions,
mhm.
by other people. Right?
Yeah, it's like a
So,
form of escapism. And if you have any budding actors or actresses, they would really, really enjoy it.
and then they can use the same questions in their evening activities to find a girl or boyfriend.
As always, we do have a worksheet included in the handout, which you'll all be receiving tomorrow, where it breaks down what your students need to do and the running and setup of the activity.
Okay, I'm going to take over here a little bit and just talk a little bit about literature and where would we be on Valentine's Day without
That was
Shakespeare?
Shakespeare.
Okay, we're going to be talking a little bit about the Shakespearean sonnet, okay, and looking at two in particular. Let me know if you can guess which two sonnets I'm going to be talking about. Maybe the first line, if you know them. They're probably the two most famous, or at least the two most famous that are about love. Okay, and a lot of the poems are about love, if not all of them, certainly. Um, just a little history of the sonnet. Although the sonnet derives from poems written in the courts of Frederick II in Palermo in the 13th century. It generally came into English through translations and imitations of poets such as Dante and Petrarch. Okay, so this is another case in which little bit like Chaucer, in which you can sort of connect Italian literature to English literature. Um, I would have to say that Italian literature as well as French, probably the main influences on English literature. Um, in comparison to Italian, uh, English is a little bit of a rhyme poor language. So, in the sense that we have so many vowel sounds and we don't have, for example, the standard vowels or accents regular at the end of words. So what the Shakespearean sonnet introduced by the man on the right, the Earl of Surrey, was it didn't use quite so many repetitive rhymes. So in the Petrarchan sonnet, we generally have three rhymes for each. Well, how can I say? For each line has two other rhyming ones, whereas in the Shakespearean one, there's only one other rhyming. So it goes A, B, A, B, C, D, C, D, E, F, E, F, and then a couple of at the end. Okay. Another characteristic element of the Shakespearean sonnet is the iambic pentameter. Okay? This is goes back to Chaucer in English, as who's known quite commonly as the father of English poetry in the 14th century, and it consists of a 10-syllable line divided into alternate weak and strong syllables. Okay, for example, Sonnet 18's second last line is an example of iambic pentameter. That is, so long as men can breathe or eyes can see. So, to exaggerate this, we might say, so long as men can breathe or eyes can see. So, we're looking at the accented words with the backslash over them, I guess. Um, Obviously, it's not read with that strong intonation. So, what is actually great about this is that the iambic pentameter sort of occurs quite naturally, quite often in English poetry or in English speech, to be honest. Okay, so it's not so far from usual speech in English, but it also has the regularity that sort of makes you aware of it being poetry, not prose. Okay? It's often known in Shakespeare. It's used also in Shakespeare's plays. In general, when people are speaking in poetry, a bit more formally or a bit more, how can I say, imaginatively, rhetorically, in Shakespeare's play, it goes into unrhymed iambic pentameter, which is often known as blank verse. And that's a very common form. For example, Paradise Lost by Milton is written in blank verse, and a lot of other poets since him. Okay. Uh, we're going to look at two sonnets. So starting with sonnet 18, where we looked at the line before, to show how, he alternates. So when we think of Shakespeare with Shakespeare sonnets, we're thinking of love sonnets, but they sort of take, having so many sonnets means he takes many different approaches. Okay. If we look at sonnet 18, it's one of a series that's been traditionally assumed to be addressed to a fair youth. That is, it's actually, strangely, it's a love sonnet, but not to a romantic partner, or at least not obviously to a romantic partner. It's not, there's a lot of debate about who it might be. One of the candidates is in the picture there, but it's certainly addressed to a young man because it's in a series. Uh, and the poet seems fascinated by his beauty. And there's a theme of these poems, of this series, not the whole book, but the series of poems, that he's pressing the man to procreate, have children, so that his beauty continues. Okay, excuse me a moment. In this sonnet, and in others, he seems to claim that while bodily beauty is mortal, immortality may be achieved in poetry. So Shakespeare's a very self-reflexive poet and playwright in this sort of way. Um, so I'm sure you're familiar with this, but I'll give you a read of it as well. Um, Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art more lovely and more temperate. Rough winds do shake the darling buds of May, and summer's leaf hath all too short a day. Sometime too hot the eye of heaven shines, and often is his gold complexion dimmed, and every fair from fair sometimes declines, sorry, by chance or nature's changing course untrimmed. But thy eternal summer shall not fade, nor lose possession of that fair thou owest, nor shall death brag thou wanderest in his shade, where in eternal lines to time thou growest. So long as men can breathe, or eyes can see, so long lives this. This gives life to thee. We have on the left there, we have one of the original printings of it. Okay? One of the great strengths of this poem is the sheer delight in its own form. Okay? That is, it takes the tradition of the Petrarchan sonnets, okay? That is, using elaborate metaphors and similes to describe a loved one's beauty. Okay? Um, Here, however, it's almost like a negative. Okay? So searches for similes and finds each one wanting in the sense that it doesn't match up to the beauty of his, well, either beloved or the man he's describing. Okay. So you'll see that all the comparisons there are negative comparisons in the sense that it says, shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Okay. But I can't. Okay. Because summer's day can be marred by winds, heat, or clouds, and in the end, summer is transient, leading to autumn and winter. Okay? Most of the sonnets that Shakespeare writes contain what is known in English, an Italian word, but in English as the volta, where the tone of the poem changes. Usually, this occurs at the beginning of the third quatrain, although sometimes it happens at the beginning of the couplet. In here, it's at the beginning of the third, and so we sort of have a turn. So the first and the second stanza sort of develop the same argument, and then we have a look at it from another side. Okay? So this is where he introduces the theme of immortality. Okay? Uh, Ironically, the poet can't claim immortality for the youth's beauty in itself, but only through the sonnet. So it's sort of saying that the fact that I'm writing this sonnet about you is what will make your beauty immortal. So, Shakespeare wasn't a particularly modest poet. He didn't have much to be modest about. Okay? And so saying that the youth's beauty will only outlast the summer by being captured in the lines of this poem. The couplet informs the readers that the fact that we're reading the poem itself. And I mean, in the end, he's true. He's right that we are what 400 years later, and we're reading the poem that while we don't even know who this person he wrote it about, who he wrote it about was. Okay, so the youth indeed has become immortal. Turning to another very popular Shakespearean poem, Shakespearean sonnet, is another way he plays with the conventions of sonnets. Okay, looking again, if we go back to Petrarch, we're looking at sort of extended metaphors of beauty, things like this. Here, he's again negating this, but in another way. Okay, my mistress's eyes are nothing like the sun. Coral is far more red than her lips red. If snow be white, why then her breasts are dun. If hairs be wires, black wires grow on her head. I have seen roses damask, red and white, but no such roses see I in her cheeks. And in some perfumes there is more delight than in the breath that from my mistress reeks. I love to hear her speak, yet well I know that music hath a far more pleasing sound. I grant I never saw a goddess grown. My mistress, when she walks, treads on the ground. And yet, by heaven, I think my love as rare as any she belied with false compare. Okay, excuse me. We have a little bit of a joke on the right there, so he's a bit of an exaggeration. I mean, this is what it might seem to us in modern language. Here we have Shakespeare at his most iconoclastic, so taking the Petrarchan sonnet and really breaking it down. In some senses, I guess it's also quite a bit misogynistic. I mean, he's certainly not saying how beautiful his lover is, although it does have a bit of a turn at the end where he justifies it. Instead of, excuse me, one moment. Instead of searching for metaphors coming up short as he did in 18, here he's negating the traditional similes of the sun, coral, snow, roses, perfume, music, and goddesses. Okay? He puts out that metaphor, one that is common in other poems, particularly sonnets, and says that they don't correspond. Okay? The only thing he sees as a similarity is between his lover's hair and black wires. Okay. In this case, we're not talking about wire as we think of it today. That is something that conducts electricity. But in that time, wire would refer to thin golden chains, jewelry or hair nets, which were obviously gold, never black, as his mistress's hair. Okay, so obviously, you wouldn't be appealing if someone has a black necklace around if it's normally it's gold. Okay. Here the Volta comes further towards the end, just before the couplet. So we're talking about if we just go back, the just at the end of the before the last two lines. Okay, so there's a subtle shift that prepares you a little bit for it. So when we have the notes of disgust we find in the first two quatrains, talking about her hair, the wires being black, or her skin being dark, which in that time we're talking about, a classical English beauty of having pale skin, okay? And then also talking about her breath being like smelling rather or stinking, as reeking, as we say, okay, and her cheeks not being like roses, okay. Um, in the last quatrain, which is the what lines 9 to 12, okay, wait a second, whatever they are, okay, I think that's right. 9, 10, 11, 12. Yep, okay. Um, Here we have a little bit more positive. Okay, he admits that while her voice isn't music, he loves to hear her speak. While she's not doesn't float like a goddess, she walks on the ground. So which could be seen as a positive thing that she's literally down to earth, as we say. Okay, so it does sort of prepare us, but it's still negating the metaphors or similes we have. Okay? We have this couplet that sort of achieves a sort of magic here. The poet insisting that his love is as rare as, and maybe even rarer than, all the other poets that have these extravagant things written about them. That they are roses, that their breath is perfume, and that their voice is music. Okay? Here we see why he's been saying these negative things about his lover. He's been saying, in the sense that he wants to praise her by showing that he loves her for what she is, not for the fact that she is like perfume or like a rose. Okay. And he's praising the real woman, not the false exaggeration. Okay. Um, when we're saying this, obviously Shakespeare's doing this in other poems, so it's not as if he's not aware of the fact that he has done this before in other poems. Anyway, coming to the end of our webinar, whether it's dating games, listening exercises, or literature, I think you'll find the theme of love and romance is a really great topic to add something extra to your classes. Okay? Depending on the age of your students, it's a theme that is at the forefront of their minds. And why not ask students even to write a sonnet of their own, or to find an English translation of a famous love poem by Dante, etc. Okay, maybe they could do a better translation, okay? Or the other way around, they could find a Shakespeare sonnet and do a translation into Italian. Okay, obviously you might not be able, they would probably not be able to keep the iambic pentameter or retain the rhymes, but that's really not an important thing. Okay, getting the meaning there and seeing even if they can take out some of the words. Like, for example, a very evocative word in that last poem is reeks, okay,
Mm.
which generally we talk of as you would never say a person reeks and expect not to get a slap in the face. I
At
think,
least. Yeah. Or
yeah,
maybe that you could get your students to write a similar sonnet for the 21st century.
yeah, exactly. So that one, very good point. That one is very adaptable for parody. I mean, in a certain sense, it is a parody of other poems already. Okay? Um, One common Valentine's Day poem in English is of this form. Okay? Roses are red, violets are blue. Then we have a line. Okay? In this one, sugar is sweet, and so are you. Okay?
Oh, thanks, Josh.
You can see some examples here, okay? Although they're not always and so are you, but some sort of form of that, with rhyming with you. Okay. What we generally have is the third, and sometimes, as you can see, the fourth line varies according to the writer. Okay. Can be romantic, okay, such as the one with sugar is sweet. Okay, but it can also be ironic, satirical. Okay. For example, onions stink, and so do you. Okay. This can be a good, fun one to get students to write. Okay.
Hmm.
Um, because I mean, they really only have to change one,
Two
or
lines at
maybe
max.
even two lines. Okay. The first ones generally stay the same: rose are red, violets are blue. Okay. Um, and then think also about maybe you could propose for Valentine's Day. Would students like to play their most romantic song and talk about it, as long as it's in English? Okay, I'm not talking about San Remo. Okay. Talk about their favorite romantic film, TV series, or book. Okay, so I think you can get them to bring in their own material, and I think you could really make that work. Okay, so let us know if you've done any of these poems, or you've got any ideas of your favorite romantic literature or works of art in general. As always, we welcome your suggestions. So please let us know if you've got any ideas for us to do in the future. We're already working on some that are coming up from suggestions that you
Hmm.
us, you can always email us with them as well. Okay. Thanks for your attention. As I mentioned at the beginning, you'll receive a certificate of participation and an accompanying handout with all this material, a lot more worksheets and links. If you don't get it in the next few days, just contact me there for Monsieur, and I'll get that to you pretty soon. Okay. There's an error there. It should be in 2 weeks. Next week,
No, next week's Banksy.
we're going to be talking about Banksy, the graffiti artist, political activist, and even filmmaker in the English classroom. So uh, join us again next week, and we'll be talking about that. Thanks a lot for your attention, and thank you very much, Rebecca.
Very welcome, Josh. Thank you,
And
everyone. I hope you all have a wonderful Valentine's Day
yeah,
and also Pancake Day the day before,
yeah, too, true.
or at least it will be for me.
So yeah, have a great Valentine's Day, and thanks for your attention. Okay, bye everyone.
Bye bye.